What is going on with Donnie Freeman?
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day, and we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we're going to talk about Donnie Freeman and Syracuse basketball because Adrian Autry, during the ACC Coaches Weekly Media Call, boy, that was a mouthful, he shed some light on the Donnie Freeman situation. So we're going to talk about it here on this show. We're going to talk about what Donnie Freeman brings to Syracuse if he comes back and what could be next for Syracuse and Donnie Freeman. Before we get to everything, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. So let's go over the Donnie Freeman quote plan. All right, the plan. Here's what Adrian Autry had to say, and I'll read it for you right now here on this podcast. Quote, I think at this point we have to come up with something within the next week. Probably in this upcoming week, we will figure out what's the plan. Now let's go over the context, the entire backstory of Donnie Freeman before really we dissect everything that's going on, all right? So let's start off from the very beginning. Donnie Freeman came into this season with high expectations, and for good reason. For those that don't know, he is the highest ranked Syracuse basketball recruit since Carmelo Anthony in 2002. High expectations, right? And Donnie Freeman, I mean, look, if you thought that the bar was to play like Carmelo Anthony, well, then he's obviously not that. But he's been playing really well. In 14 games this season, before the injury, which we'll talk about in a second, in 14 games this season, his point per game averages were as follows. 13 points a game, 8 rebounds, shooting 50% from the field, 33% from the three-point line. Is he a good defender? No, I don't think he's a good defender, but we saw Syracuse run a 2-3 zone against Cal, and I think that Donnie Freeman would be better in a zone because he's got a lot of length. And we know that length works really well in the 2-3 zone. So now let's keep going, all right? Right before the Georgia Tech game. Boy, that was so long ago, right? Yeah, it was. Because it was on January 7th. That's nearly a month ago. Donnie Freeman was ruled out of that game with a lower right leg injury, and Syracuse listed him as, quote, day-to-day. What does a day-to-day injury mean to you? It's kind of subjective, but at least for me, when I hear or when I see a day-to-day injury update, my thought is, all right, so he's probably that player, that athlete is probably coming back within a week. In more extreme cases, maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks. Well, spoiler alert, Donnie Freeman has not come back since January 7th when he was ruled out. He has not come back yet after being listed as day-to-day. And now, let's keep going here. Adrian Autry provided an update just a couple of weeks ago. He provided some quotes on the Donnie Freeman situation. Do you remember what those quotes were? I actually did a mini podcast on it. Well, if you don't, that's okay. I will share them again with you all. Adrian Autry said, quote, it's always his decision. It'll be his call, him and his family, his camp. This is on whether or not or when Donnie Freeman returns this season. And he also said in that same update that Donnie Freeman really wasn't doing anything that would signal that a return was imminent. I think the exact verbiage that Autry used was, quote, non-weight bearing. So basically, he wasn't going to return really anytime soon. And this was just a couple of weeks ago. Now, with this entire situation, There are just so many question marks that I have. It's been really weird. It's been really frustrating how a university can label someone as day-to-day, and then that player hasn't played for nearly a month. We have very different definitions of day-to-day if you think that a day-to-day injury is supposed to be a month long. And like I said, there are just so many question marks. How does Adrian Autry not know what the plan is with Donnie Freeman? How does he not know? Like, really? Or he does know what the plan is, and they're just waiting until later in the week to announce the plan. And what is the plan? How severe is this injury? I mean, he was listed as day-to-day. He should have been back weeks ago. He's still out. I'm not suggesting that Donnie Freeman is faking this injury by any means. I don't think he's faking it. I just want to know what is going on. Thank you for Adrian Autry. At least in a few days, we should know about it. But there's just a lot of question marks. And also, his wording on the quote, once again, his quote was, I think at this point, we have to come up with something within the next week. Probably in this upcoming week, we will figure out what's the plan. Just interesting wording. The plan? Seriously? I mean, that's very interesting. Come up with something? Come up with something. You know what would have been a better thing to say? How about this? We'll have an update on his injury timeline shortly. PR team, hello? That didn't occur? Really? Is Donnie Freeman ever going to play again for Syracuse basketball? Yeah. I don't know. Will Donnie Freeman in his camp decide, you know what? It's not worth the risk of trying to play on the injury or trying to come back from the injury. And I want to shut down for the season and maybe go pro. I mean, Adrian Autry, after all, said a couple of weeks ago that it'll be up to Donnie Freeman in his camp on whether or not he comes back. It honestly sounds like to me, through this whole situation, we have reached this point, we're almost a month in, that we're either going to find out in the next couple of days that Donnie Freeman is going to return very soon to the court. That's option number one. That would be preferred. That would be nice. Or number two, he's never going to play again this season. He's just not going to return. And if you think about it, there's only about a month or so left in the year. That's it. I mean, we're already in early February here. Can you believe that? It's flying by. It's flying by to the point where lacrosse season has already started. By the way, did you check out the lacrosse team? That was incredible. I mean, they just absolutely destroyed them. That's where we are at that point. We are in the second crossover season, where it's men's basketball, men's lacrosse, women's lacrosse. There's not a lot of time left. So will he play? Will he not play? I wish I could provide you all an update on that question. I wish I could give you all the answer, but I don't know, and it doesn't seem like anyone really knows. I find it hard to believe that Adrian Autry doesn't know, but I guess we're going to find out in a couple of days what the quote-unquote plan is. I just find this whole situation really, really bizarre. Hopefully, though, Donnie Freeman can come back and will come back, and coming up, we'll talk about what he could bring to Syracuse if he comes back. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams. It's the Chiefs and the Eagles. Endless possibilities, but I think we really know what the outcome is going to be. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, I think it's going to be Patrick Mahomes, or even betting on the coin toss. I mean, who knows who's going to win a coin toss? FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate, plus knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. I'm Jackson Holzer, and this is Locked On Syracuse. And folks, if you like what you're hearing, if you enjoy this podcast, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Tell one or two of your closest Syracuse Orange friends so this channel can grow and reach all Syracuse Orange fans. And on today's show, we're talking about Donnie Freeman and the quote-unquote plan that Adrian Autry and Syracuse apparently still need to come up with in the next couple of days, which will hopefully be announced to the public in short order. Now, let's be optimistic for a moment. Let's hope that he does return. What does he bring if Donnie Freeman returns to the court for Syracuse basketball? I think that this would be fantastic for the Orange. We already talked about his numbers in the first segment, but I think it goes beyond just that. If Donnie Freeman returns for this team in the coming days, I mean, forget the Duke game. We'll talk about that in a moment. But if he comes back, let's say before Saturday, I think that drastically improves Syracuse's chances of making the ACC tournament. He's going to give Syracuse more scoring. Even though he hasn't been a good defender, like I said in the first segment, I think he would be better in a zone. He provides rebounding as well, decent enough shooting. 33% from the three-point line. I mean, I would prefer that Donnie Freeman plays more inside the paint and in the mid-range because he's better there. But 33% for a guy who's 6'9", playing the 4 is pretty respectable. Do I want him shooting 5 3-pointers a game? No, but 1 or 2 a game? Sure. That's reasonable, so he can provide a little bit more floor spacing for Syracuse basketball. Now, as it stands right now, the Orange are 1.5 games up on Boston College and NC State, who are the first teams out of the ACC tournament. Syracuse is 4-7. Boston College and NC State are currently 2-8. Also, Virginia is behind Syracuse at 3-8. Now, with or without Donnie Freeman, okay, even if best case scenario, we find out tomorrow or Wednesday that he's going to suit up, he's going to play against Duke. I'm going to let you all in a little secret. I think Syracuse basketball is still going to get its butt kicked by Duke, even if Donnie Freeman's on the floor. I don't think it's going to matter. Now, I'd love to be wrong, but I think it's fair to assume that Syracuse is not going to beat Duke on Wednesday, barring a miracle, which they can happen. Miracles have happened before. I mean, the miracle on ice, when a group of college kids decided to beat the best team in the world. But for all intents and purposes, I don't think Syracuse has beaten Duke, with or without Donnie Freeman. Now, we can talk about the next couple of games after that, which are going to be very important for Syracuse basketball. You got Boston College at home on Saturday, and then you got Miami in a few days after that on the road. I think with Donnie Freeman, if he were to come back before that stretch, he gives the Orange a much better chance of sweeping Miami and Boston College. And if Syracuse were to sweep that stretch, if they sweep Miami and Boston College, I'll tell you right now, they're going to get in the ACC tournament. They are in. It's over. The reason why I say that is because not only does Syracuse get to 6 conference wins, which could be enough in of itself, but also you're giving Miami a bottom feeder another loss, and you're giving Boston College another loss. It's a 2-game swing right there against both teams. So they're very important games for Syracuse basketball. And if Donnie Freeman can return before those 2 contests, he gives the Orange a better chance of sweeping, which I think is a reasonable expectation even without Donnie Freeman. And the Orange essentially put themselves in the ACC tournament. He would also give Syracuse a better chance of putting themselves in a better position in the ACC tournament. I've talked about before here on this podcast that I think the high-end ceiling of what to expect of the high-end ceiling, a reasonable expectation for Syracuse basketball moving forward is they get themselves in the top 9 of the ACC. Because if they get in the top 9 in the ACC, at least they don't have to win 5 games in 5 days. It becomes 4 games in 4 days. Doesn't sound like much, but does anyone want to play 5 games in 5 days? Do people really want to do that? Do you really want to play that extra game against that 15 seed if you get the 10? No, right? You don't want that. you would much prefer to be in the top 9. I mean, they're not going to be in the top 4. They're not going to get the double bye where they would only have to win 3 games in 3 days, but could they be in the top 9? Probably going to need Donnie Freeman for that to happen. I mean, he would give them a better chance to pull off some upsets like North Carolina, like Pitt, SMU. I don't think Syracuse is beating those teams if they don't have Donnie Freeman. But if they do have Donnie Freeman, they have a better chance. So not only does he most likely put them in the conference tournament if he were to come back, but he also gives them a outside possibility that they finish top 9 in the ACC, which would mean they would only have to win 4 games in 4 days to make the ACC tournament. Bottom line, if Donnie Freeman were to come back to Syracuse basketball in relatively short order, that would be terrific news for Syracuse basketball. And I hope that we get a positive update in the next couple of days from Adrian Autry and Syracuse basketball. Now, coming up, we will talk about what lies next for Syracuse basketball and Donnie Freeman. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jackson Holzer, and now let's talk about what lies ahead for Syracuse basketball and Donnie Freeman. So with or without Donnie Freeman this season, all right, let's say even if we get a positive update or a negative update, it doesn't matter. We have to talk about what's next for Donnie Freeman in the Orange. There are 3 possibilities. Donnie Freeman returns to the Orange next season, he goes pro, or he enters the transfer portal. Now, first off, let's go over the transfer portal, okay? I think it's hard to predict, or it depends. Predicting whether or not someone enters the transfer portal. Sometimes the writing can be on the wall. For example, last year, Justin Taylor entering the portal was pretty predictable. I think we all saw that coming a mile away, given his performance that season and wanting to get a fresh start somewhere else. But also, the portal can surprise you as far as who you lose on your team. An example that comes to mind is Malik Brown. I was pretty surprised when Malik Brown entered the portal, especially because it seemed like after Syracuse was eliminated from the ACC tournament last year, it seemed like Malik Brown said he was going to come back. And nothing had really changed between then and when he decided to enter the portal. I mean, Donnie Freeman was still committed to Syracuse. So I was a little bit surprised. So you never really quite know as far as the portal. But now it comes down to, is he going to go to the NBA, the G League, or is he going to stay at Syracuse? It's a little bit easier to predict that because you got mock drafts. Mock drafts they're not perfect, but they can give you an idea of where a prospect ranks in the NBA. For example, if Donnie Freeman was absolutely tearing it up this season and he was projected to go in the lottery, I think it would be a fair assumption that he would go to the NBA. He would not be coming back to Syracuse basketball or entering the transfer portal. If you're going to be a lottery pick, you're going pro after one season. So as far as NBA mock drafts, this morning I took a look at 4 of them to see where they had Donnie Freeman, and all of these mock drafts at the time that I looked at them were published within the last week. So Sports Illustrated, they had him at 26th overall, so that's a first-round pick. NBA Tankathon had him at 48th overall. Bleacher Report had him undrafted, and NBADraft.net had him also undrafted. So it's a little bit mixed results. You have a publication saying that he's going to go first round. You have another saying that he's going to go undrafted. So it seems like he's fringe. He's fringe to go in the NBA draft. Based on these mock drafts, I think it's fair to assume that this could easily turn into a Judah Mintz situation from a couple of years ago regarding Donnie Freeman. Now, for those that don't remember what happened with Judah Mintz just a couple of years ago, not talking about 2024, I'm talking about 2023. Judah Mintz declared for the NBA draft in 2023 after his true freshman season. He declared for the draft, but he maintained his college eligibility, something that he did not do in 2024. In 2024, he declared for the draft and said, I'm out, that's it. No maintaining college eligibility. With Donnie Freeman, with 2023, he declared for the draft, maintained college eligibility, and then got feedback. I believe he participated in the NBA Combine as well. Ultimately, he decided to forego the NBA draft and return for another year at Syracuse. I could easily see that happening with Donnie Freeman. He seems like he's going to be a fringe NBA prospect this offseason. Whether or not he comes back or not is irrelevant for this season. So I would say it's more probable than not that he's going to enter the NBA draft, but also maintain college eligibility. Now, whether or not he decides to enter the portal is another discussion for another day. I have no idea. But that's what I could see happening with Donnie Freeman. And the good news for Syracuse basketball is that they are well equipped for either situation to occur. They do have a good succession plan from high school. If you talk about their high school recruiting, right? Since a lot of people are talking about their high school class coming in 2025, top 10 in the country, right? Well, one of those top two recruits, right? One of them's Ty Anthony. The other is Sadiq White, who just so happens to be a top 30 national prospect in the country who happens to play power forward. And oh, by the way, we talk a lot of defense here. Syracuse needs better defense. Well, Sadiq White is one of the best defenders in the entire country coming into Syracuse next year. And he's a power forward. So if Donnie Freeman returns, well, that's great. I would call that a good problem to have. You go from Jair Davis and Donnie Freeman to Sadiq White and Donnie Freeman. Jair Davis is out of college eligibility. He cannot return. I think that would be an upgrade. However, if Donnie Freeman's gone, at least you have Sadiq White in place. So no matter what, they are in decent position if we're talking roster outlook for next year, whether or not Donnie Freeman leaves the Syracuse basketball program in one way, shape, or form. It would be amazing to have him back, but in my opinion, I don't think it's a necessity that he comes back in order for Syracuse to reach the NCAA tournament in 2026. Because make no mistake, they better be in the tournament in 2026. Enough is enough. This is, barring a miracle run in the conference tournament, this is going to be the fourth consecutive year they're not in it. They better make it next season. I don't care if they come up with a number one recruiting class in 2026. They better make it. But either way, they're in decent position if Donnie Freeman does or does not return. Obviously, I think we would all prefer that Donnie Freeman returns to Syracuse basketball. I'd love to hear from you in the comments section below, your thoughts on what's going on with Donnie Freeman. What do you think he brings to the table? And of course, what do you think he's going to do this offseason? You think he's coming back for another year, or you think he's going to go pro or perhaps enter the transfer portal? I love to hear from you in the comments section below. Now let's talk about what's coming up on the podcast in the future. We got a couple of guests coming on the show in the next couple of days. So tomorrow, Mike McAllister from 24/7 Sports, he will be on the podcast to talk about the official signing day in college football. The official signing day, of course, is on Wednesday. Syracuse does have one player in its class that still needs to sign, and by all accounts, I think it's Tyleek Hill, not Tyreek, Tyleek, or Tyleek. He's going to sign in all likelihood, but Mike McAllister will be joining the podcast to talk about signing day and, of course, any possible news in the transfer portal, whether or not it seems like they're going to wait for the spring or perhaps they could make one or two additions between now and then. Then on Wednesday, we got Neil Adler from Inside the Loud House. We're going to talk about Syracuse football and their schedule. It will be released in the morning on Wednesday, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. We'll also potentially have a mini podcast for you all if there's something huge that happens on signing day. If nothing really happens huge on signing day, I would not expect any sort of follow-up podcast to occur. Just assume that status quo is status quo. And then on Wednesday night, Syracuse basketball is hosting Duke at 7 p.m. Eastern. There will be a full post-game reaction podcast, win, lose, or draw. I think it's going to be a loss, but you know what? You never know. And there's going to be a full post-game reaction podcast. That podcast will serve as the Thursday full podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. And for your second listen, you could check out the Locked On ACC podcast. Alex Dono and Kenton Gibbs, they keep it real and bring you the truth about where your favorite ACC team stands within the conference. Find Locked On ACC on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. And if you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe. Tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse so this channel can grow and reach all Syracuse Orange fans. And I will see you all again really soon. Hopefully, we get positive news regarding Donnie Freeman.